So I think next time we meet a Pandit, we should ask him whether he has found his soul or not. And not go by simply the outer caste mark. That will be something. That's how Swami Vivekananda asked Sri Ramakrishna. I don't want to hear people talking about God. Have you found him? He says, yes. Can you show him to me? That's the simplest way. So, Shobindo in Foundations of Indian Culture highly appreciates these cave temples. And he says they are built, they reveal a very subtle truth. At one place he says that Indian temples, regardless of the deity, they are always like an altar to the divine self. Invariably, the way they are built, they are an altar to the divine self. They are built like that. And that's what we will see here. Now we had one glimpse of the cave temple. Now we'll have something else. And it's very interesting that these two images are superimposed upon each other, or rather one follows the other. So initially we saw that one is stripped gradually of everything, all the props, everything is taken away. As one nears the soul, even humility appears a proud state. Even to say that I am nothing appears strange and absurd, because there is, how does this I say that I am nothing? Of course it is nothing. One doesn't even, there is nothing which can be said except this yearning. But then after discovering the soul, the whole temple as if magically begins to change. And now Sri Aurobindo describes, as one enters, there is something else one discovers, which is very beautiful. Of course, this does not mean that everybody will, these are very symbolic images and they can come in different ways to different people. It doesn't mean that as one enters within, one is looking for, where are the golden serpents mentioned? Where is the dove on the cornice? No, certainly not. They're all symbolic images. One can experience them either as states of consciousness. That's the usual thing. Or else in different forms. Like, for instance, Sri Aurobindo says that many birds, they are part of soul powers. Here we will see dove and the eagle. Somebody else may see duck. Somebody else may see a swan. It doesn't matter. These things, images can appear. Or a fire or a flame. So as Savitri enters through this door, what does she find? Two golden serpents round the lintel curled. Symbol of evolutionary force and strength. They have this, all serpents are not bad in terms of inner vision. Even outwardly, most of them are benign, harmless creatures. But otherwise, while snakes in general represent hostile energies, some snakes represent evolutionary energy, like the snake of Shiva or the snake of Lord Vishnu. They are evolutionary energies. Or white snakes, golden snakes. Golden snakes are characteristically transforming energies. So she sees these two golden serpents, they are also symbol of the Kundalini. They are intertwined into each other. So all these powers which are lying asleep, suddenly now they know that somebody is entering into this threshold kingdom, which is a taboo for the average ordinary human consciousness. So two golden serpents round the lintel curled, enveloping it with their pure and dreadful strength. Who is it who has come thus far and seeks to enter? Looked out with wisdom's deep and luminous eyes. An eagle covered it with wide conquering wings. So birds, flowers, they are all signs of a psychic life. Very often, even mother says love for flowers is a sign of psychic emergence. So there are so many ways. So eagles, again eagles are intuitive thoughts, intelligence. So all this begins to awaken. An eagle covered it with wide conquering wings, flames of self-lost, immobile reverie. Doves crowded the grey musing cornices. like sculptured postures of white bosomed peace. Somehow, many images of Shiva are coming here, including the dove. You know that famous story when Shiva and Parvati meet together in the cave, in the state of Naisargikta, when his this moon and snake, everything is kept outside. That's symbolic tale. But there is something which is inside in that cave, and that is a white pigeon. He becomes Shukdev, who hears all that Shiva reveals to Savitri. He hears. It's a very symbolic story that it's state of peace. Then that knowledge is revealed to oneself. So dove is always a symbol of peace. Different colors, green dove, blue dove, all these kinds of dove can appear in the inner vision and experience. Across the threshold's sleep she entered in and found herself amid great figures of gods, conscious in stone and living without breath. Now we see another image, and Sri Aurobindo greatly appreciates particularly the southern temples. He says that they are full rich with details, right from the outside wall. And another temple which we'll see beautifully described, more or less those who have seen it, is Konark Sun Temple. Rich with details, as if the outer life is an extension of the inner life. From within, all the details of life emerge and are held within it. It's a very interesting temple, and Sri Aurobindo has immortalized it in one of his poems, The Gleam of Konark, or in Konark's Gleam, and where he says that a woman is sitting, looming the thread of fate. Her head is merging into the sun, and her feet are full of moonbeams. And the 9 powers that determine fate are there, singing hymns of world poem before her. He's immortalized it. So, it's a very interesting temple, a temple to the sun. So she experiences all these gods who are quiet in that hush, living without breath, watching with fixed regard the soul of man, executive figures of the cosmic self, world symbols of immutable potency. Surely those who build these temples, they must have had some experience of this kind. So in every temple we go, before we touch the sanctum sanctorum, we'll have many of these gods, quite a number of deities depending on the temples. And then finally we touch the main deity to whom the temple is dedicated. It may be Shiva or Krishna or Vishnu, but other gods will be seen as adjuncts. And then one goes through them. These are powers, they are extensions of the one divine self. And all these powers we begin to experience and they begin to enter into us. Another sign, it comes spontaneously when one is close to the soul or realizes the soul. One cannot then worship the gods. One becomes like a brother and kin to the gods. Because one realizes that just as one is an extension of the divine self, the gods are also extension of the divine self. They become friends, brothers and sisters, rather than beings you have to worship, because all worship and adoration goes to the Supreme. On the walls covered with significant shapes, looked at her the life scene of man and beast. See Konark? The life scenes, even things which we may say that how can a temple have these scenes? And yet they are there. It's as if the whole life through which the soul journeys and grows, there is nothing which the soul has not experienced in one life or the other. It goes through all the entire gamut of experiences before it becomes the Lord and King of nature. And the high meaning of the life of gods, the power and necessity of these numberless worlds. So in these temples, nothing is vain. It's rich with details. Everything has its place. Everything has its own utility in the cosmic scheme of things. That is the soul vision. and faces of beings and stretches of world space spoke the succinct and inexhaustible hieratic message of the climbing plains. So we'll see it in many temples. It's arranged like there is one set of images on the lowest, then another layer, then a third layer, then sometimes a fourth layer. As we go inside, we'll see the cornices, they are arranged, and there is a meaning and significance behind it. In their immensitude, signing infinity, they were the extension of the self of God, and housed, impassively receiving all, his figures, and his small and mighty acts, and his passion, and his birth, and life, and death, and his return to immortality. These are the eternal witnesses who, from life to death, to beyond death, to rebirth, have been witnesses to all our acts. Things which we call as mighty, things which are small, they have recorded it somewhere in that inner state. So this is the way one enters into the inner sanctum sanctorum. Of course, the real temple is inside us, and this is just a symbol, an indication, a document in stone. To the abiding and eternal is their climb. Even these gods are climbing. They are climbing toward the eternal. To the pure existence, everywhere the same. To the sheer consciousness and the absolute force and the unimaginable and formless bliss. To the mirth in time and the timeless mystery of the triune being who is all and one, and yet is no one but himself apart. Shivoham, Shivoham, Satchidanandoham. That's what it is. Shivoham, Shivoham. Absolute force, absolute wisdom. And yet who is apart? Satchidanand, the triune being. Triune being is Satchidanand, who is one. And that is where one reaches near, that touch, that contact of the divine. Look at this line. To the mirth in time and the timeless mystery. It is beyond time, and yet it leans into time, in the play of time. Of the triune being who is all and one, and yet is no one but himself apart. It is beyond all creation, beyond everything we can conceive of, and yet he has become all things. That's how the Ishopanishad puts it in those two succinct sloka, where who is the real knower? Who knows all things as extension of the oneself. Atme vabhud vijanata. Then man passes beyond grief. Tatra ko moha ka shoka. Then he is not deluded. Everyone where one sees an extension of the same divine self. There was no step of breathing men. No sound. That is the only unpolluted place. Because pollution is not just material. There is a worse pollution. Pollution of desires. Pollution of thoughts. So there is no pollution of breathing men. No sound. Only the living nearness of the soul. That which was a conception, that which was maybe, may not be, vague, possible, not possible, pineal gland, all this goes away. Because one is aware of the nearness of the soul. One knows the soul because one becomes the soul. Yet all the worlds and God himself were there. If one reaches that point, then everything one can discover there. All the worlds and even God is there. You know those two stories, the two paths where Kartikeya and Ganesha are on a race. And then Kartikeya goes on his peacock. Whoever comes first, that is the race. And poor Ganesha, with all his weight, has only a mouse. Nowadays, mouse is very powerful. You see, this story, Indians were ingenious. They discovered the mouse, which is the first and foremost in knowledge. Now the mouse is knowledge. So Ganesha on that mouse, no chance. He just goes around Shiva and Parvati and stays there. When Kartikeya comes back, he's already given the medal. He's the first one. He says, what is this? He didn't even go. He says, no, he is smart. Smart boy. He has just gone around and said, world is in you. I don't need to. So if I have gone around, I have gone around the entire world. All the worlds, not just one world. All the worlds are within the one. And so, this is what Savitri discovers as she comes near to her soul. For every symbol was a reality and brought the presence which had given it life. So, these symbols that one experiences as one journeys, their powers, their reality, their truth is also revealed to the person and given to the person. It's a done thing. So if one experiences, let us say, a swan or a fire, its energies, its power, its knowledge, they are all revealed spontaneously. Otherwise, they are simply, if we go outside, then we don't understand its inner truth. So they are revealed in their truth. All this she saw and inly felt and knew, not by some thought of mind, but by the self. This is the vision now that Savitri has as she comes nearer and nearer to the soul. With that vision, we will see in stone the world mother. But if that vision is lacking, then even if the divine comes before us, we'll say another human being. This is the difference of the vision. And that's why the beauty is that, again in Indian thought, Sri Aurobindo speaks of it, that yes, we have seen God in stone, in rivers, in sky, in the most inanimate object, not only in the wise but also in the foolish. This is the universal vision. And how this awakens? When we have touched that core. Then only this vision comes. That's why you see in India everything is worshipped. Everything is sacred. Nothing is left without tree. There is a worship for tree. Even snakes. There is a Nag Panchami when you call the snake. I have never seen one come, but the milk is kept. And there are stories that the snake comes and drinks the milk. So all kinds of things, Nothing is left. Everything is God. And everything has its own, Godhead. So this is the vision that Savitri has, because she is near to the soul, and everyone has who discovered their souls. Not by the thought of mind, but by the self. A light not born of sun or moon or fire. A light that dwelt within and saw within, shedding an intimate visibility, made secrecy more revealing than the word. So very often, even with Mother and Sri Aurobindo, people make the mistake of believing by analyzing Mother and Sri Aurobindo's words, whatever they have written, they want to draw conclusions. What they don't realize is that whatever Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have written is a small fraction of whatever they have not revealed. There is a lot more they have not revealed. How will we know it? We can know it only by love, by identification, by grace and revelation. Otherwise we cannot know. Oh, Mother has written this, Sri Aurobindo said this. So, does it mean that what Sri Aurobindo has not said, that is not true? There are many things he has held within, because the time is not ready, we are not ready. So, secrecy was more revealing than the word. It's very powerful. And this light within, in the Upanishad, there is a very interesting story about it. So there is a debate going on, and those days, great debates, not debates of scholarly nature. Very often we have these misconceptions. Oh, in Indian minds we used to debate and argue. It's not true. It was not debate and argue with the mind. It was a different kind of a debate, where people who had realized, who knew the truth, they discovered how much deep the person has gone in. So Gargi tests Yagnavalk in a very interesting way. How does she test Yagnavalk? Because Yagnavalk is supposed to be Brahmajnani. She doesn't ask him, what scriptures have you read? Okay, can you recount all the 700 slokas of the Gita by heart in the correct intonation and pronunciation? Can you, none of these things. She just says, tell me one thing, O Yagnavalk, when the light of the sun is not there, what lights up. Now you see, it's very symbolic. She says, the light of the moon. When the moon is not there, the stars, when the stars are quenched, the fire, when the fire is not there, then Yajnavalkya says, the light of the self, from whom all these have derived. So Gargi says, and where from the self comes? And Yajnavalkya gives a very interesting answer, which feminists wrongly understand. Gargi, one more question and your head will fall into 1,000 pieces. And Gargi says, yes, he knows it. Now, but people, see, look, male chauvinists. Just because she is a lady, he did not answer her. Valid question. Where does the self come from? Where is it established? The logic is very simple. Gargi, this was one of those, questions where you can trip. Now, supposing he gave a very lengthy reply, Gargi would have said he doesn't know. He gave a correct reply. The moment you give it in mental terms, you know it not. So he says, Gargi, if I reveal it to you, your head will fall into 1,000 pieces. That is the limit of mental questioning. Mental questioning stops there. You have to realize it. By its nature, it is infinite. On what is infinite established? It's an illogical absurdity, even logically, so to say. So he says, one more question and your head will fall off. But this is the light of the self, which remains even after all the lights have gone off. So when all the lights go off, corollary, now logic, when all the props are snatched away from our life, we should be happy that we are getting close to the light of the self. It stands to reason. But people lament that state. I am so alone. Nobody is there in my life. So nice. Because that means the self is very close. God has chosen one to discover the self. Today only I was reading this wonderful line. He who feels lonely is very near to finding his self. This is a sign. So we should rejoice that one has, but we throw away the chance and lose it. Made secrecy more revealing than the word. Our sight and sense are a fallible gaze and touch, and only the spirit's vision is wholly true. It's another dimension of existence, the fourth dimension, as the mother would say. As thus she passed in that mysterious place, through room, through door and rock-hewn door, she felt herself made one with all she saw. So it's no more just a seeing. One grows intimate with these beings. They become one friends and companions. Shiva and Krishna and Ganesha and all the other gods and goddesses become friends. They are there because they are powers that reside in our very soul. They are no more in some temple where one has to go on a particular day in a particular muhurtam and worship them with a particular lota of milk. It's not required. All that one has to do is, Lord Shiva, He is there. Even when one mentions, speaks about Him, He is there. See, because they are there as conscious powers. We have never explored them. So this is, and they are there in everyone. It's not that some people are more blessed. Everybody is blessed. Nobody is an orphan. That we will see subsequently. She felt herself made one with all she saw. A sealed identity within her woke. Now Savitri is nearing her secret soul and she discovered something very beautiful. She knew herself the beloved of the Supreme. What a privilege. Rarest of the rare privilege. This state cannot be fabricated. We cannot make the mind think like this. It's a state of consciousness in which one can awaken, where one feels one is the beloved of the Supreme. And it has nothing to do with all one's worldly people in one's life. In the morning we were talking about this aphorism of Sri Aurobindo, rather two aphorisms. In one of them he says, to commit adultery with God, this world was perfectly created. Look at the lines. We are tied to the world as a wife to the husband. We owe to it a debt of duty. But our secret allegiance goes only to the Supreme Lord, who is our sole beloved. How beautiful. He reconciles All the things are there in the world. But secretly, whom does one love? It's only the Lord. That's beautifully revealed in a story where Savitri tells Draupadi. It's one of those conversations of the dead. I think Nalini Da has written it along the lines of conversations of the dead by Sri Aurobindo. Where Savitri tells Draupadi that yes, I am a sati, but how come you have been given the status of a sati? Why? Why not? But didn't you marry 5 husbands? She says, yes, but I loved only one. Oh, then you were partial. So it is true that Arjuna was your favorite one. No? Who told you that? Oh, maybe Bhima. He is the one who killed Kichaka. No, you are mistaken. Oh, Yudhishthira the king. No, you are again mistaken. One more last guess. Nakul and Sahadev, the handsome, smart. No. Then whom did you love? I loved only Krishna. Therefore, I have reached that point. It doesn't matter. I loved only Krishna. He is my heart's Lord and beloved. From the beginning. I didn't marry him. It's not needed. He is my real lover and beloved. So she discovered she is the beloved of the Supreme. Then nothing matters. Somebody asked mother about her outer life and she said, what a foolish man. Don't understand. This is nothing, no one else except the Lord. She knew herself the beloved of the Supreme. These gods and goddesses were he and she. The mother was she of beauty and delight. The word in Brahma's vast creating clasp. All these are experiences of the Divine Mother. We will discover it as anshas and portions. She has discovered it in their fullness because she is the Divine Mother incarnate. The world puissant in Almighty Shiva's lap. The master and the mother of all lives, watching the worlds, their twin regard had made. In Krishna and Radha, forever entwined in bliss, the adorer and adored, self-lost and one. It's a state where one is so mingled with the divine that one knows that if this is what one promises, the Lord will fulfill. Because verily He loves. It's such a state of consciousness. Mystics have spoken about this state. And this is not yet about the transformation, just the nearness of the soul. This is the truth of Krishna and Arjuna coming together, of Nara and Narayana. Wherever the two come together, there is victory. There is delight. In the last chamber, on a golden seat, one sat whose shape no vision could define. If you define it, you lose it. Now it is this, now it is that. It can become all the countless worlds and then it can vanish into formlessness. That is why no vision can define. It can become Shiva to the seeker of the divine as Shiva. It can become Vishnu to the lover of Vishnu. It can come as Christ to somebody who worships Christ as the Supreme, or Krishna to another. And it can at the same time be all these things and none of them. So Sri Aurobindo puts it in one line magically. A shape whose vision, one sat whose shape no vision could define. Sri Aurobindo is not using the word shapeless. A shape no vision could define. Try to define it, you lose it. Only one felt the world's unattainable fount, a power of which she was a straying force. Unattainable fount. We are reminded of these lines in Savitri elsewhere, Vision and the Boon. O bliss, whoever dwellest deep hid within, while men seek the outside and never find. O radiant fountain of the world's delight. She is the radiant fountain. So one goes near and then one finds. An invisible beauty, goal of the world's desire. Mark these lines. And Sri Aurobindo was asked once, is beauty always associated with form? He said, no. There is a formless beauty which is the essence of things. Imagine, we associate beauty always with form. Though actually, if we really look closely, beauty does not come from form itself, but something else which is felt like a charm, which is there, like a glow, like a feel, which makes even stone look beautiful. It's actually formless, but it can infuse into a form and render it beautiful. But in our ignorance, we think beauty has to do with form. Form is not beautiful. It can be very dead and very lifeless. So, an invisible beauty, goal of the world's desire, is sun of which all knowledge is a beam, a greatness without whom no life could be. The prayer of the mother, one of her most favorite prayers, O thou who art the life of my life, the light of my intelligence, the love of my heart. So one discovered that, I thought these things are mine. They're not mine. They are nothing but a drop coming from that mighty, infinite source. Thence all departed into silent self, and all became formless and pure and bare. This is purity in spiritual sense. In spiritual sense, purity has nothing to do with moral notions. Purity is a state in which we are open to the divine influence and nothing else. It is possible only for that moment when we are in contact with the soul, not otherwise, and when we are identified with it. It's nothing to do with social, moral, religious notions of good and bad. That is the state of purity. Pure. Then, through a tunnel dug in the last rock, she came out where there shone a deathless sun. A house was there, all made of flame and light. What a house. And crossing a wall of doorless, living fire, there suddenly she met her secret soul. It's so beautiful, that it's so powerful. One doesn't want to speak anything else. One doesn't want to get into Jivatma and Chaitya and soul and self. But maybe we'll speak about it at some point of time. But this is not the moment. This is the moment just to adore and rejoice in that contact that Savitri can provide us. Look at the beauty and power of this wonderful book. If we really read it, just read it, go deep into it, it's as if Sri Aurobindo is taking us within, putting us in contact with our own soul, crossing a wall of doorless living fire. This is the last test. Whether one is truly devoid of everything, there is enough purity. All else will be burnt away. All the dross. And what does she find there? We'll read a few lines, then we'll stop. A being stood immortal in transience, deathless, dallying with momentary things, in whose wide eyes of tranquil happiness, which pity and sorrow could not abrogate, infinity turned its gaze on finite shapes. So here comes the subtle distinction, if we may say so, between the central being and the psychic being, the Jivatma and the Chaitya Purusha. So Jivatma, the central being, is that which is above time and space. It is always in contact with the infinity. And yet, it turns its gaze towards earth in matter, gets involved into matter. And that's what develops as the psychic personality. It puts itself forth. We'll see that description, we'll read it tomorrow. How it puts forth something into the play. It dallies with transience. It itself is immortal. It's causeless. It knows itself as portion of the divine all the time. In Upanishad, it is the image of Dvasuparna, the two birds sitting on the tree. One which is eating the fruit, then it looks up and sees the other one who is not eating the fruit and simply enjoying. It is in a state of bliss, perpetual bliss. So this fruit is the, which helps us to progress, is basically, the psychic being which goes through life after life, the karma and resolving the karma. But there is something else which is untouched by all this. And the psychic is nothing but a projection of itself into time and space for the sake of the play. And this is what we see in these double images. Deathless, dallying with momentary things. Immortal in transience. Infinity, turning its gaze on finite shapes. Observer of the silent steps of the hours. Eternity, upheld the minute's acts. And the passing scenes of the everlasting's play. So there she gets the secret. All these scenes, passing scenes, are beheld by whose gaze? This other bird, which watches the play, is unaffected by it and lives in a state of perpetual delight. Pity and sorrow could not abrogate its happiness. Its happiness is all the time there. So it watches the play, and things which would give sorrow either for oneself or others, they do not cloud its state of tranquil happiness. In the mystery of its selecting will, what it does in the divine comedy, a participant, what does it select? It picks up the milk and leaves the water, as they say. Neer Shir Vivek, actually it belongs to the soul vision. From every experience it can extract truth. Mother speaks of that. That even from what appears as the darkest and ugliest of moments, the soul can extract its share of light. Selecting will. It picks up that. Discards the rest, not needed. Everything, the worst, it can turn to the best. So that is the power of this secret soul. In the divine comedy, a participant. So from there it's a divine comedy. Before that it's a tragedy. There you see, it's a play, it's a leela. Always we have played together. What is Mahabharata? Krishna and Arjuna going together. As long as he is on the chariot of Krishna, what is there to worry? Everything is a play and a delight. But if we are not conscious of this, then it appears something frightening, something madness. But with the soul, when we look at it, then it's a different vision altogether. In the divine comedy, a participant. Mother says that men live harassed life. They take everything so seriously. And then she says, look at God. He doesn't take anything seriously. Therefore, he could create this wonderful world. In that state, one can experience it. Not otherwise. We take everything seriously. This happened. Oh, I have committed a big mistake. Oh, I am a sinner. Oh, so-and-so is a sinner. He is still worse. But as we grow nearer and nearer to the soul, all this is absorbed inside and turned into pure honey. That's why it is called as the eater of the honey. There are so many descriptions of the soul in Yamna Chiketa Samvad in Kathopanishad. One of them is eater of the honey. Doesn't matter what flower, it will find out the honey and extract it. The spirit's conscious representative, God's delegate in our humanity. Comrade of the universe, the transcendent Sri. Comrade of the universe. Imagine. This is our real privilege. And a ray of the transcendent. She had come into the mortal body's room to play at ball with time and circumstance. This is the game of games we are here to play. To play at ball With whom? With fate. Let's play. Who will be against us? Fate. All right, good. Fate will not tell you anything. Doesn't matter. Let's play this game. With time and circumstance. Such were those beings who could challenge fate, who could take on destiny, who were not afraid of death. How this was created by spiritual means. It is not something which can be done purely by an intellectual education. When we rise in that state, then what is life and what is death? Play at ball with time and circumstance. I think several times I have mentioned this poem of Sri Aurobindo Baji Prabhu, which can infuse life into a near dead person's body. When Tanaji Malsure tells him, you are going to die, I will build for you a huge fire. Nobody has ever seen such a fire, Chita, as I will build for you. Baji, I am going to fetch Shivaji, and I know that when I come, your body would have fallen. And still you would be here holding the pass, desperate pass. And Baji Prabhu says, what? You will build me a fire? You think I am this 5 feet 6 inches man? Made up of animal cells? Then you know me not. There is no fire in the world that can burn Baji. Rather, I will go there and wait for you. When after your deeds are done and you come back, then I will meet and greet you. And together we will take stock of things. Who can say this? Look at the story of Abhimanyu. Who could do it? Who could go into the jaws of death and say it's fine? It's a state of consciousness. Ordinary person living all the time afraid, practical reason, no. So this is what those rishis tried to inspire in our acts. Only somebody who is conscious of his soul, his immortality, can go and fight all these terrible people, warriors, knowing certain death, because he knows he is deathless. So play at ball with time and circumstance. A joy in the world, her master movement here. The passion of the game lighted her eyes. That soul rejoices because it knows it grows stronger through everything. It doesn't shun, it's not afraid of meeting the world contacts, because through every contact it can end up entering and finding the divine behind, who is hidden behind many masks. I still remember one little somebody who had very reserved and staying in ashram, doesn't know what life outside is, being suddenly taken to Delhi in a Delhi mall, that too, and feeling so scared. So I said, now look, sit here and find Krishna. The person is totally lost and confused. Find Krishna here? Yes, find Krishna. Here too he is there. That's how we play at ball. This is a state of consciousness of the soul. Smile on her lips welcomed earth's bliss and grief, knowing that they are all passing things. A laugh was a return to pleasure and pain. At one place, Mother says, to laugh at your enemy is to disarm him completely. And somebody asked Mother, are you serious? How can one laugh at one's enemy? Mother says, you don't know it? It's a true experience. You don't know it? It's a true experience. When you live in the soul, you can laugh at one's enemy and disarm him, because that's the last thing he expects. He feeds on the fear and anxiety. When you laugh at him, he says, oh my God, this fellow is incorrigible. A laugh was her return to pleasure and pain. All things she saw as a masquerade of truth, soul vision, disguised in the costumes of ignorance, crossing the years to immortality. All she could front with the strong spirit's peace. This is the first secret Sri Aurobindo is revealing to us, through which we can actually turn all life into yoga. Not before finding the soul. It's when we have found it, then everything can become a means to unmask the divine beloved. Everything can be turned into a movement towards the truth, towards the light. But first necessity is to find the secret soul. So we'll stop here. We'll read these 4 lines again tomorrow and continue.